Hi there, it's Llarold, and today I'm putting out my Protection Warrior class guide for Shadowlands patch 9.2. I've been keeping busy with Protection Warrior and Brewmaster Monk guide stuff on Wowhead, which you should check out if you want a written version of the kind of stuff I'm going to cover in this video. I go into a lot more detail in the Wowhead guides, and, you know, it's YouTube. They're a little easier to keep up to date. That being said, I will try to answer all the questions in the comment section as they come in, so leave a comment. Like and subscribe, all that normal YouTube stuff, blah, 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 blah. I think that's enough preamble. Let's talk about Prot Warrior and what's changing in patch 9.2. In terms of base class changes, nothing. I find this pretty disappointing if I'm being honest. Protection Warrior hasn't been all that good from a design standpoint since anger management was nerfed going into Shadowlands. It's fine, it's okay, but it's also the least popular tank in both Raids and Mythic Plus, and for good reason. The defensive toolkit is strong against auto attacks, but not great against anything you can't block or spell reflect. Prot Warrior's damage output is also underwhelming. It's okay in Mythic Plus where you can get a lot more value out of Revenge, but in Raids, Warrior is fighting hard with Blood Decay to not be last place. There's a common sentiment among people on YouTube and tank theory crafters and all that tank balance is the best right now that it's been in a long time, maybe ever. And I agree for the most part. Prot Warrior is the one tank that is clearly underperforming the rest of the pack. It's a pretty big mistake on Blizzard's part to see Prot Warrior underperforming like this for so long and not add any kind of minor buff or rework or special personalized love to the base class. It needs it. But there is something for Prot Warriors to look forward to in patch 9.2, the new tier set bonuses. I've never been much of a salesman, but maybe that's what sales is right there. Oh, you know, you're not getting what you need, but here's what you want. The 2-piece bonus grants a major rage generation and damage increase. Every time you spend 240 rage, your next Shield Slam or Thunderclap deals triple damage, generates triple rage, and casts a free Ignore Pain. Thunderclap also slows harder. I don't exactly know how hard it does. I wrote that it slows for triple strength. I tested it, it looked like it did, but the tooltip doesn't update. It's incredibly hard to tell, and somebody told me I was an idiot who got all my numbers wrong because I said 60% slow instead of 50% because I was just eyeballing the thing. I don't know. Either way, the bonus is great. It works well, even if you make no rotational changes at all and you just warrior brain the whole thing, but it also gives a very powerful reward to players who manage the bonus skillfully. The 4-piece bonus juices the 2-piece bonus into overdrive, adding a bunch of extra power onto Avatar. Thanks to the positive feedback loop this tier set generates in conjunction with anger management, Avatar is available every 35 to 40 seconds. It also makes Avatar a much stronger cooldown both offensively and defensively. This bonus is terrific. It's fun, and it provokes an active, aggressive playstyle over more passive talents. In fact, this whole pair of bonuses is really, really, really good. I think it might be the best bonuses available to tanks that aren't Prot Pally. It adds a ton of extra shielding from Ignore Pain throughout the course of a fight, like a free Ignore Pain every 8 to 12 seconds for my testing, which is really good. You absolutely want to get the 4-piece bonus as quickly as you can, and barring any unexpected nerfs, you're going to want to wear it until next expansion. There are two ways to look at how you can approach this set of bonuses. The dumb warrior brain version is just a player rotation like normal, smash your keys, spend your rage as quick as you can, and you'll be stronger than you were before the end. This works well. The tactical genius version is to track stacks of Seeing Red with a weak aura, and time your Shield Slam casts and rage consumption so that Shield Slam comes off of cooldown, right as you spend enough rage to trigger Outburst. This will let you spend every Outburst buff on Shield Slam, which will maximize your rage generation and damage output and feed into that rage feedback loop even harder. This is the ideal way to play, but it requires a lot of attention and quite a bit of luck. In either situation, you should pretty much always try to cast Avatar on cooldown. The 4-piece turns it into a minor defensive cooldown that you could potentially line up with boss abilities, but I don't know, I don't think it's really ever worth holding. Similarly, sitting on an outburst buff is really not something you want to do either. Using it on Thunderclap, at least outside of like great big AoE, isn't ideal, but it is better than letting Outburst sit unused for several seconds. Now, on the subject of great big AoE, Thunderclapping in great big AoE is a loss of rage compared to using it on Shield Slam, but it is an immediate damage increase. So I think, generally speaking, if you're on like short-lived ads, Thunderclapping them, totally fine. If it's going to be like a very sustained AoE, I think ultimately you're best just using whichever of the two abilities is available, but I think ideally you're going to want to go for maximizing your rage generation. On that note, because you can't generate any more Seeing Red stacks while Outburst is triggered and waiting to be used, any rage you spend while Outburst is up is rage wasted. If you use Avatar while you have Seeing Red stacks, they will not be consumed, and you can generate more stacks by spending rage. If you trigger Outburst from spending rage before you use the one that you got from casting Avatar, you won't get a second charge, you just waste an entire proc of Outburst, so that is bad. Don't do it. You always want to have Shield Slam or Thunderclap ready to go either in the next global or 2 whenever you Avatar. Alright, next up is the double legendary power. This is being time gated until week 5 of the patch or the 3rd week that the Mythic raid is open. I've never complained about time gating in any of my videos. Don't go check. But I hate this. Oh my god. Basically, it works like this. When you complete the campaign quest for week 5, you receive a legendary belt that you can wear along with any other legendary in the game. The belt grants you your Covenant's legendary power, so for classes that have good Covenant legendaries, this is a huge boost in power. You're also able to... You're not actually able to upgrade that belt, but you are able to craft that power into any gear slot other than like weapons and trinkets once you hit Revered with the new rep, the Enlightened. And that you are able to upgrade all the way to the new max item level of 291. All right, now let's just dive into those Covenant legendaries. Kyrian Warrior's Covenant legendary power is really good for Arms and Fury. It adds a lot of damage. And that is literally all it adds, though. That's kind of boring for Prot. Kyrian Warrior is still terrific, and I would say it's probably going to be the most popular Prot Warrior Covenant in patch 9.2, but maybe not. The Necrolord Prot Warrior, or Necrolord Warrior Covenant Legendary, is very, very strong for protection. Glory has been a fun utility option, but it just wasn't really worth sacrificing personal legendaries prior to patch 9.2. Now that you can equip both the Covenant Legendary, or technically Unity, along with Reprisal, it's head and shoulders above the other Covenant options. Glory boosts Conqueror's Banner's value as a group buff by adding an extra target, and massively boosts its uptime as a personal buff. And when I say massively, I mean you can potentially hit 100% uptime on your personal Glory banner with the new 4-piece bonus if you play well. Assuming a normal setup, banner's worth 400 mastery, 4 rage per second, blah blah blah, 30% move speed, and about 20% more strength with the Necrolord Conduit. That's really, really good. The downside is that maintaining banner at 100% uptime requires generating and spending 17.5 rage per second. So it's a really frantic playstyle. That may be fun. It is fun to me, but it can also be totally overwhelming. Whether you like it or hate it, it's probably going to put some real stress on your wrists. And I kind of like that, but you know, that makes it pretty unforgiving. Basically, anytime you have to leave melee range for a boss mechanic or move between pulls in a mythic dungeon, that's a spot where you can probably wind up breaking your banner. That's kind of annoying. I think for the most part, you'll be able to get around that by just chain pulling in mythic dungeons, but there are, you know, dungeons like Top, where you have to run like a couple 100 yards between packs. I don't think you want to chain pull there. It's okay. Night Phase Covenant Legendary is very simple. It adds an extra tick of Ancient Aftershock, which means you get slightly more rage and crowd control, and it adds a stacking dot onto Ancient Aftershock's ticks. Basically, it works just like the Kyrian Legendary. It adds damage, and that's about it. It is good, but it's very similar to the Kyrian setup, which is, I mean, mostly what I've been saying about Night Fae Warrior All expansion. Because it's not adding any like really good new utility, I think this winds up just sort of increasing the gap between Kyrian and Night Fae even further. You now have Kyrian that's like terrific damage option, Night Fae that's like pretty good damage option, which isn't really that useful when you already have one that's better, and then Necrolord, which is totally different playstyle, high utility. Last is Sinful Surge, the Venthyr Warrior Covenant Legendary. It might be good for DPS warriors, and I actually think the Legendary is okay for Prot, but Venthyr Prot is still horrendous. They just never made Condemn any good for Prot Warrior at all. It's bad. Just ignore it. They made 3 Covenants for Prot Warrior. That's it. Now let's get on to Covenants. Prot Warriors have 3 fairly competitive options, and, you know, Kyrian is the best all-around choice. I think it's by far the easiest to play well. I would recommend Kyrian for everyone. It's the most consistent at dealing damage. The threat generation is good. The damage and rage generation are good. It's good. It's good. And it's fun. Necrolord is very good when it's all working well, and buffing your allies every 2 minutes is great. When you get forced out of melee range by a boss mechanic, or you have to move between pulls in a Mythic Plus dungeon, it can fall apart. This makes it way less forgiving than other Covenants, which can be frustrating. It's also, as I said before, pretty hectic compared to the other Covenants. It doesn't have the same powerful burst damage cooldowns that Night Fae and Kyrian do to establish threat at the start of a pull either. That can be a problem for holding threat in Mythic Plus. Night Fae, I would say, as I kind of already said, is the one that's now fallen into 3rd place. It basically does all the same stuff as Kyrian, it's just on a longer cooldown. It deals more damage per cast, but the overall DPS is generally a little lower, and the consistency is a lot lower. The range on DPS is a little wider, so you could potentially do a little more as Night Fae, but probably wind up averaging a little less. That's really the only problem with it, though. It's just a little less reliable than Kyrian. It's good. Play it if you like. I like Soul Shape. That's the end of my thoughts. Let's jump on to Soulbinds. As for which Soulbind you should run as Kyrian, it's Mechanicos. He adds the most damage, and his tree is very good. This is the setup I would go with most of the time. The only thing I would change is I would drop Hammer of Genesis and a 3rd Endurance Conduit for Soul Steel Clamps and a 3rd Potency Conduit against purely single target bosses. As Necrolord, I would use Plague Defies or Merilith. The guaranteed mastery from using Fleshcraft is really nice. Kevin Zoozling is a good bonus on top of Conqueror's Banner, and Ultimate Form is okay on occasions when you need to be immune to CC. That could potentially help you immune a stun that might otherwise stop you from being able to maintain Conqueror's Banner. Cool. And finally, Night Fae. Naya is my preferred Soulbind. Karain's crit buff can be pretty good for Mythic Plus and on ad fights, but I prefer the consistency of Naya. She gives you a lot of stat budget and more defensive consistency than Karain. I'm not going to waste time talking about Venthyr anymore. Now let's move on to Conduits. Protection Warrior Potency Conduits are generally not very good. Regardless of which of the 3 Covenants you opt to play, your Covenant-specific Potency Conduit is the best one. Adaptive Armor Fragment is available to all 6 tank classes, and it's fine. I think for Warriors, it's worth wearing as your number 2 Potency Conduit, not because it's so great, but because the other options are not so great. Show of Force is the better of the 2 remaining generic conduits for Prot Warriors. It's okay in Mythic Plus, but not great. In single target, it's quite bad. Ashen Juggernaut is the other generic conduit available to Prot Warriors. It sims extremely well because Warrior sims assume you'll consistently use Execute and be able to maintain this, but that's not all that realistic. As a result, this one is usually pretty bad. If you are generating enough rage to be able to actually consistently maintain the buff during a single target fight with a, reasonable sized Execute phase, I actually think it's quite good. I'm probably not ever going to go out of my way to use this in that situation, but I do think there are some players for whom it would be a really good option. Endurance conduits are quite a bit better. Stalwart Guardian grants cooldown reduction to Shield Wall. and it allows you to consistently bring shield wall's cooldown under 2 minutes if you're using anchor management. That's great. With the tier bonuses and so on, I think you can get more like into the range of 60 to 90 seconds, which is really impressive. Unnerving Focus is the second of the 3 decent endurance conduits for prot warriors. It's kind of weird, but gaining a extra rage generation while last stand is up is very good. It synergizes nicely with either anger management, the new tier set bonuses, or the Necrolord Legendary Glory, actually. It doesn't increase the rage generation you get from Conqueror's Banner or the tier set, but it still gives you more rage, which helps fuel those rage generation feedback loops. In third place, Brutal Vitality grants you Leech that funnels directly into your Ignore Pain. This has the downside of requiring Ignore Pain be active in order for it to do anything at all, but it has the benefit of never overhealing. It's not a huge bonus since tank damage is generally pretty low, but it's okay. This gets better when you pick up the tier set bonuses, as you get a bunch more free Ignore Pain casts and more damage. That being said, I still don't think this bonus is like terrific A+ material. I think it's just okay once you get that bonus synergy from tier. Condensed Animosphere is the final endurance conduit worth mentioning. It provides a steady trickle of healing on a 10-second cooldown. Prior to getting your tier set bonuses, I think it's superior to Brutal Vitality, but once you have tier, I think Brutal Vitality becomes a more useful option. Either way, they're both pretty close in value, and that's it as far as conduits that are worth mentioning. Yeah. I guess I'll mention Finesse Conduits. Inspiring Presence adds a small boost of defensive value under Rallying Cry, and that's good group utility. This is a great Finesse Conduit. I usually go out of my way to pick this conduit up. Safeguard is also okay. It makes your Intervene a little more powerful as an external cooldown to throw onto other players. It's not very strong and it requires some effort to use effectively, so I wouldn't recommend going out of your way to get it, but it can be okay if you really need it. Now let's move on to Legendaries. There are only 2 pieces I need to talk about here, but I will start by saying that tier set forces you to not wear Legendaries in the head, shoulders, chest, legs, and gloves slots. You can wear a legendary in one slot, but then you're banking on getting 4 pieces of tier across the other 4 slots, which just don't do that to yourself. Don't gamble. All right, the first legendary is Reprisal. It's the best. I like to think about it like this. Reprisal turns Charge and Intervene into separate keybinds and cooldowns for Shield Block. Just like you always want to keep Shield Block up when you're actively tanking, you want to use Charge and Intervene while you're tanking when you're wearing Reprisal. If you keep them on cooldown consistently, you get about 35% more uptime on Shield Block and a little under 2 rage per second. That's very strong. By comparison, the wall only generates about 1 to 1.25 rage per second, and it doesn't add any Shield Block uptime. Reprisal is the best legendary for prot warriors, 0 question, and you should use it at all times. The only other option worth discussing is the wall. The wall is extremely simple. The wall is easy to use. The wall grants you 5 extra rage with each shield slam, but that doesn't get scaled up by tier set bonuses. That's about it. On average, it's way weaker than Reprisal. The only reason I'm mentioning it is because using Reprisal can be a little overwhelming for some people. I would say that learning to play the right way is better than being lazy, but the wall is not bad. It's simple, it's easy, it's okay. I already went over the Covenant legendaries, and I wouldn't wear any of them until you get the Unity legendary from week 5 of the patch 9.2 campaign. Alright, now let's move on to talents. Prot Warrior basically has 2 talent setups, one for Raid and one for Mythic Plus. I'll go ahead and just toss both of them on the screen with a little tag that says Raid on one and Mythic Plus on the other. Some of these talents are dependent on having tiers, so let me just run through those really quickly. The first 2 tiers of talents are locked in. I wouldn't change either of them. Booming Voice is the best talent in Raid. In Mythic Plus, I think with the new tier bonuses, it could be better. Best Serve Cold has been more popular in Mythic Plus throughout Season 2 of Shadowlands, and I've become a big fan. I think it'll be a lot stronger at the start of Season 3 before anyone has finished their tier bonuses, of course. I like both talents, and I think Best Served Cold will probably be better for Kyrian and Nightflay in Mythic Plus even once you have tier. The rage generation from Booming Voice is probably going to be too good for Necrolords to give up though, even in Mythic Plus. Ravager is the more popular talent in the tree in Mythic Plus because it's a good burst damage and rage cooldown that's great for establishing threat at the start of polls. The consistent haste value of Into the Fray has been better in raids. I think that this tier will hold steady in both cases, even with tier sets. And finally, I think that once you have tier bonuses, Anger Management becomes a 100% must-have talent no matter what. Until then, Heavy Repercussions is really useful defensively for maximizing, your tankiness in Mythic Plus. I think it can be a good Mythic Plus talent for the first couple of weeks, but after that, once people have tier, Anger Management takes over, and I think it never lets go. There's not a lot of stuff to say about the Prot Warrior rotation. It's very simple. You should use your cooldowns as much as possible unless you're holding them for a specific reason, like an ad spawn or an extra damage phase. The only other note I have here is that Execute deals less damage per rage than Revenge once you get to 3 or more targets. So if you're fighting 1 or 2 targets, dump rage with Execute once you can, if you need to dump rage on something other than Ignore Pain. Otherwise, if you're fighting 3 or more targets, Execute's basically a useless skill. Defensively, it's the same playstyle as it has been for years. Use shield block as much as you can while actively tanking. As long as you're using Reprisal, be sure to leap out and charge back in, or intervene out and charge back in as well. Always try to keep shield block up to prevent as much damage as possible. Ignore Pain is good for preventing unblockable damage or covering yourself up during the periods where shield block is down. So are your many defensive cooldowns, so don't be afraid to use them liberally. If you're using Anger Management, Shield Wall is going to be one of your shorter major defensive cooldowns. It'll be shorter than Last Stand or Rally and Cry, so feel free to use that as kind of a front line of defense. The bottom line is your defensive cooldowns won't do you any good if you try to hold them for later and then wind up dying without using them. You never want that to happen. The basic stat priority for Prot Warrior is pretty much the same as it has been for the past couple of expansions. Haste is your most important stat, versatility is also very good, mastery is okay but a little less consistent, and crit is a little better offensively than mastery but the least consistent defensively. Ultimately, the most important things to go after are tier set bonuses, sockets, and item level. Then haste, and then the rest of the stats don't matter that much. Lightless Force is the best weapon enchant for dealing damage. As far as trinkets go, there are some decent ones from raids and dungeons, and I'll just highlight the best options. Phial of Putrefaction from Plaguefall is a simple, single target DPS increase from Mythic Plus that's totally passive but very nice. It tends to be a lot better in raid than it is in Mythic Plus, which is, I don't know, seems like bad design. What do I know? The best defensive trinket from Mythic Plus is Blood Spattered Scale, which is from the other side. It's an excellent defensive trinket that still offers a decent chunk of damage output. Both of these two trinkets were recently nerfed in an attempt to make other trinket options more desirable. Was anything else buffed? No. It's all still bad. Codex of the First Technique from Tazavesh is actually pretty good, and it is something I think a lot of players will be farming now that Tazavesh is being added to the Mythic Plus dungeon pool in Season 3. The stamina's not great, but the damage reflection effect is very good for raid fights where you're consistently tanking a lot of ads, and obviously Mythic Plus. There are 2 new trinkets from Sepulchre of the First Ones that are just okay right now, and the rest are fairly generic. Pulsating Rift Shard is an active defensive trinket. It takes 3 seconds to go off and has a 1-minute cooldown. It's kind of like Blood Spattered Scale at first glance, but the 3-second windup and the extremely thin line make it pretty uncomfortable to use. On a training dummy, it's a good defensive trinket, but in practice I have real concerns with being able to actually hit with this stupid thing. The 1-minute cooldown is decent, so I think this will wind up being decent. They did rebalance this trinket while I was working on all of these videos, cutting it from a 3-minute cooldown to a 1-minute cooldown, which brought it up a lot in my eyes. And they also cut the wind up from 4 seconds to 3. I wouldn't be surprised to see more changes. They actually did another round of changes in between the first and second time I edited all of these videos to make it split its damage. It's okay. As a shield, I think damage-wise it's pretty bad, but it just... be ready for more changes on this trinket. Pocket Protoforge is very simple. It's a proc shield trinket. It's boring, but it's decent. 1 proc per minute is probably too low for the tuning that it's at. Elegy of Eternals was giving a massive amount of secondary stat budget for most of the PTR. That has, now that we're finally reaching the end of the PTR and going into live servers, they have nerfed that trinket to be incredibly undervalued at 287 item level. I think it's giving about the same amount of secondary stat as the trinket from Stone Legion Generals on like either Heroic or Mythic was giving of versatility. It's crazy how bad this is. It's undervalued by like 2 full raid tiers. Not difficulties, like like 50 item level under budget. Terrible. Okay, let's quickly go over a couple of trinkets from Sanctum of Domination that I think will still be good next year, at least for a little while. Shard of Anhilda's Aegis from the 9 is really strong defensively. It reduces a flat amount of damage from all hits and dot effects while it's active, and that calculation is all done after damage reduction effects are calculated. So, you know, for blockable damage, it's very near to just being Divine Shield without a threat drop, which is amazing. The only way this doesn't keep being used through basically the entire rest of the expansion is if it gets nerfed, which I think will happen. If they cut the value down by 20%, I still think it's very usable. If it winds up being more like 50% or more, I think for everyone other than Monk, this winds up being basically an unusable piece of garbage trinket. We'll see when they get around to tweaking this, if they do at all. They may wait until Heroic Week of the new raid so that they're not kind of killing this trinket while people are still using it in Sanctum of Domination. I guess we'll find out. Weave of Warped Fates was redesigned to just be a normal cheat death trinket. Unlike the Splintered Heart of Alar from Castle Nathria, it doesn't really do anything except prevent your death, no damage to nearby enemies, no blowing up and killing your holy pallies. That's good, and it's a full 26 item level higher than the Splintered Heart of Alar from Castle Nathria, so that's even better. It probably will be the go-to second trinket for high-level Mythic Plus for the entire rest of the expansion, and it should be a must-have trinket for Progression Rating and Sepulchre are the first ones. So, yeah, I mean, I'm actually looking forward to this terrible trinket being really good tomorrow and no longer having to use 226 trinket as like my part of my max tankiness setup. As we're heading into the final patch of Shadowlands, I think things are finally looking up for Protection Warriors. The new content looks fun, the new bonuses are really strong and fun. Prot Warriors have not been good this expansion, but I do think they're going to be a lot of fun in the upcoming patch. They may even wind up being good thanks to their awesome new tier set bonuses, or, I mean, fingers crossed, baby, maybe there'll just be some base class aura buffs in the first couple of weeks. I'm really looking forward to playing Necrolord Warrior in Farm Raids and Mythic Plus. I think that about covers it. If you have any questions about Protection Warriors in Shadowlands patch 9.2, ask away. Stay tuned for more Shadowlands content, and thank you for watching. Bye!